Hi, welcome. I'm Danielle Prysick. I'm currently a K-5 curriculum specialist. I've been in CMS since 3rd grade, and this is my 21st year in CMS. I will be your guide and facilitator during this virtual unpacking experience for CMS 5th grade educators. So this is pre-recorded, therefore you will have times that I will give you a pause span of time. You'll hear some study music. You'll want to pause the video and just work through the work. Enjoy the process and take your time as your schedule allows. You might be thinking, who's this for? This video is ultimately designed for anyone, meaning you could be the only person teaching 5th grade ELA or simply not have someone to do this with and need a guide. You may want this as a model, or perhaps you don't have an instructional leader to guide your PLC. You may even be an instructional leader and just want to lift the load of facilitation to experience the joy of unpacking as a team and for kids. No matter the reason how you are using this, you are welcome. I do want to say this, I will give you some of the thinking, but I'm not doing it all when I show examples. I am to facilitate your process of thinking. I want to stress, the process is the work, not the product. You will get out of this what you put in. So I do recommend doing this with a team or a group of people. That way you'll come out with better thinking, ideas, and connections. Your note catcher is your guide as we journey together. If you haven't oriented to the note catcher yet, as we have done in Module 1, pause this video now and watch the video in the note catcher folder. Really do it. It'll save you time. It has evolved since that video, but the essence remains. I do use paper and pencil because I find too many issues sometimes with technology and I have to be able to write in order to internalize. That might be my method, it may not be yours. I'm also from the writing and using Post-its in the teacher manual time. You're welcome to do this as well. If you can't write in your manual, you can also print or just use Post-it notes. I've linked access to get to the PDF through ILC in the bottom of the note catcher. With that, let's begin. In each unpacking, we do one concept to lift up one of the following. Either agency, the ability of students or teachers to take charge of their learning or professional development, engagement, which is the level of interest, attention, and motivation students show while they're learning, or efficiency, the ability to produce the desired outcomes with the least amount of resources and effort. For the upcoming unit, today, we will be looking at the boxed concept on the screen. All right, so for the sake of efficiency, in lessons 2 and 3, that's when you start the athlete of student choice. They're going to select it for homework, and they determine so that they can continue to determine the factors that contributed to their change. You have a list of suggestions of athletes that you can research. But there is one of the athletes is a transgender. So just be wary of that in the climate of your classroom. One idea from one of our amazing master teachers from Ann Tillman is they loved learning about modern day athletes for relatability. So again, remember that these are just a list of suggestions and that if there's enough evidence for their outcome, in safe platforms, then modern day athletes are an open door for your classroom. Just remember, it'll be really important to vet and ensure that the resources found online are age appropriate. Following the same routine for unpacking, we also start with a vocabulary activity, as vocabulary is so strongly tied to reading comprehension, and that all students can benefit from high quality vocabulary instruction. Even students who have a large vocabulary repertoire can enrich their knowledge in ways that make it more accessible and productive. Okay, so for vocabulary, I always try and keep us up to date on cool vocabulary activities because it's so high leveraged. So NCDPI released a new one called Vocabulary Association, and I'll show it to you. They're in our public documents for the Flex Day protocols. And it's another resource that you're going to find in word study and vocabulary. So it's called Vocabulary Association Triangle, and it is aligned to our North Carolina Standard Course of Study. You can see that where they got it. There's a list of success criteria, but what you do is you provide students with 3 words they had prior exposure to. They write a word for each corner of the triangle, and then independently or with a partner, they generate a sentence that's relating these words. So then independently or with a partner, they do a synthesis sentence with all of the words. So here's an example of that with our 3 branches of government. And so I thought with Module 3, it would be cool to do it with some common concepts that we're also doing and see if students are able to relate them. So our common concepts for the first vocabulary association triangle is leaders, change, and factors. Feel free to substitute the words for other high-level concepts that are happening in this unit, but it'll be really neat to see how kids do and associate these. It also gives you an insight into how well are they really understanding the concepts of what they're doing. Enjoy! It is now our time to look at the upcoming unit together. In this section of today's PLC, we will be focusing on the big ideas across both the module and additional language and literacy blocks.
Today we are unpacking the highlighted unit on the screen. We know that the units generally progress through the patterns on the screen. So in this unit, we can expect to be focusing on the highlighted content. Another way to look at this is through the assessment lens. Take a moment and read what to expect in our upcoming unit. When we look at our unit overview, you'll notice that it is always broken into 2 paragraphs, like the one on the screen. The first paragraph is ARC 1, and this will take us to the mid-unit assessment. Whereas the second paragraph is ARC 2, and this will take us to the end of unit assessment. So across the arcs, you can see a high level of the shifts of learning. Let's explore these now. When we look at our unit overview, we first read at a high level about the verbs and skills students are generally doing. If you can't highlight, try jotting them down in your note catcher so you can see the connections and our next steps. Pause this video at this time and highlight or jot down the verbs and skills students are learning and doing across the unit and over both arcs. Now let's come back together and think through these questions. What shifts in learning are happening? And how is what is happening in ARC 1 supporting the work in ARC 2? Pause this video and take a moment to do this work and answer these questions together. When we come back, we'll have time to discuss. By now, you've noted several items. Take a look at this screen here. Compare your ideas and your colleagues' ideas with what is on the screen. What do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you want to add to your list? Or think should have been added to this list? Take as long as you need to think through this by simply pausing the video until you're ready to move on.
We know that modules and all block work together. Now that we've done module work, it's time to make our all block connection.
Now we're going to see how all block is supporting the high-level overview of the unit work you just worked through. We do this by pulling up the unit at a glance, either in the all block expansion manual, your all block manual, or in Imagine Learning. You can also use the catch and release for this work. We're going to use the expansion pack manual to model because it's clearly color-coded and the errors have been weeded out. I'm going to model this process with you before you do it on your own. I'm going to start with the fluency and gum and follow the catch and release path over the course of week 1. I read the overviews from the teacher guided, the catch, to the student independent practice, the release, and back again to the catch, to the student independent practice, the release. And I'm writing a gist or statement for my own self to understand what is generally happening in the component, and I jot it in my notes. Then I'm going to start with the additional work with complex text, which is in blue, and follow the catch and release path over the course of week 1. I read the overviews going from the student independent practice, the release, to the teacher guided catch, and back again to student independent practice, the release, to the teacher guided, the catch, and write a gist statement for my own self to understand what is happening in this component. I'll repeat this process for week 2, starting with the writing practice in green, following the catch and release all the way down, and then jotting myself a gist for writing. Again, I'll repeat this work with word study and vocabulary. For independent reading, we read this vertically, so we do that for week 1 and week 2. Go ahead and pause the video to do this work. When we come back, we'll have time to discuss. By now you've noted several items. Take a look at this screen here. Compare your ideas and your colleagues' ideas with what is on the screen. What do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you want to add to your list or think should have been added to these gists? Take as long as you need to think through this by simply pausing the video until you're ready to move on.
Now that we've had some processing time, take a minute and think. Are there any notes you'd like to add to ideas or strategies or events that students will be excited about? Is there anything that could bring students joy as they go through this learning? What would be most challenging for students? For you, what logistical considerations are important to plan for when delivering this learning? And finally, what scaffolds or support will you need to implement this unit? Please pause the recording now. It's now our time to backwards plan. Here we will look at the mid and end of unit assessments to understand the rigor and level of learning that needs to take place. Take a moment and access the assessments.
For this piece, we're going to go ahead and access the assessments linked in your note catcher. Take each one as the learner. Then you're going to record what students are being asked to do in the do column. Take as long as you need to think through this by simply pausing the video until you're ready to move on. I'll give you your next step when we come back. By now you've noted several items. Take a look at the screen here. Compare your ideas and your colleagues' ideas with what is on the screen. What do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you want to add to your list or think you should be added to this list? Take as long as you need to think through this by simply pausing the video until you're ready to move on. Now that we have the do column, think backwards. What will students need to know to get to this level of action and rigor? Jot the know actions for students in the know column. Take as long as you need to think through this by simply pausing the video until you're ready to move on. We will discuss when you come back. By now you've noted several items. Take a look at the screen here. Compare your ideas and your colleagues' ideas with what is on the screen. What do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you want to add to your list or think should have been added to this list? Take as long as you need to think through this by simply pausing the video until you're ready to move on.
We're now going to look over the learning targets for the unit. Here's where we're going to make a connection between activities and learning goals, as well as unpack key standards and tasks in both modules and the additional language and literacy block. We do this by asking ourselves, how does what shows up in the assessment show up in the unit tasks?
Now that we've unpacked the assessment, we're going to look at key lessons, and we're going to think through the following questions. Which key lessons build toward mastery of the mid and end unit assessment? And which lessons provide an opportunity to collect data and provide feedback prior to the unit assessment? Let me show you what that looks like. For this step, you need your teacher guide or your unit at a glance on ILC. You'll read the unit at a glance and annotate the standards and targets we've identified from the assessment. You'll notice that I've highlighted the specific work times that directly align with the assessment. You'll add these or list these in your note catcher. What are the standards and the learning targets? Try to find how everything we noted from the assessment shows up in the unit at a glance. Add the standard learning target and lesson to the right side of your chart. Notice here that I've also highlighted an opportunity for ongoing assessment before they hit the mid-unit assessment. These are also important to note. You can see my example notes on the assessment unpacking T-chart. This is one way you can do it. You can also color code how they relate specifically if you'd like to do that. Again, it's your choice. The most important thing is to pull out the standards and targets that directly align to the unit assessment.
We know that modules and all block work together. Now that we've done module work, it's time to make our all block connection.
In this piece, we're going to do 3 steps. We're going to be looking at where it's paced, the all block lesson versus the module lesson, so you know what date you're teaching the lesson. We're going to be looking at a data point and the levels of differentiation for each component. I'm going to give you work time in between each one, and then in the end, we'll discuss. The first step is to pace the sessions by the scope and sequence. Schools can get off pacing just by the nature of school and things happen. So wherever you are in your pacing, you're going to find the day that you teach all block, and you're going to find the day that the lesson of the module that you are teaching that day. For example, if I'm week 1, day 1 is always reading, speaking, fluency, GUM. My module lesson would be lesson 7. So on my fluency speaking, I would say it's lesson 7. And then my day 3 would be lesson 9. So I'd write lesson 7, lesson 9. And I'm going to do that for each component. Go ahead and pause the video now and figure out your pacing. Now we're going to find the next piece, the data. We want our most current data to form our flexible and fluid all block groups. The first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to reorient to our just statements that we put in our note catcher. This is the high-level data we're going after. Now that we know when we are teaching this component, we're going to look backwards to see when was our last data point of the skill or concept students are being asked to do in that all block component. For example, in fluency speaking and GUM, we may have had an end of unit assessment where we worked on our fluency. I would use that data to tell me where each student's level of mastery is. So we're going to pause the video and think through when was our last data point for each component. I will say for word study and vocabulary, since it's so much morphology, it's usually going to be the last word study and vocabulary lesson that you did in all block. Pause this video now and find the last data point you have on students for each component. Now we're going to want to go ahead and note the levels of differentiation that's happening in the all block components. The best way to do this is to go to the all block expansion pack and look at the lessons. Sometimes it straightforward tells you the levels of differentiation. Sometimes you have to look at the student worksheets. EL differentiates in different ways. Sometimes it's the product, sometimes it's the process, and sometimes it's the content. You'll want to note these levels of differentiation in your note catcher so that you are giving each student the support that they need based on their most recent data point. Pause this video now and note the levels of differentiation in each of the all block lessons. By now you've noted several items. Take a look at this screen here. Compare your ideas and your colleagues' ideas with what is on the screen. What do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you want to add to your list or think should have been added to this list? Take as long as you need to think through this by simply pausing the video until you're ready to move on.
Now that we've had some processing time, take a minute and think. Are there any notes you'd like to add to ideas or strategies or events that students will be excited about? Is there anything that could bring students joy as they go through this learning? What would be most challenging for students? For you, what logistical considerations are important to plan for when delivering this learning? And finally, what scaffolds or support will you need to implement this unit? Please pause the recording now. It's now our time to watch a modeling of a key piece of a lesson, experience a student task, or practice scaffolds, on-ramps, and supporting all learners, including above grade level students. This portion is based off of past trends or frequently asked for models.
All right, so this task is around student ownership. So I've went ahead and linked in your note catcher a video to a CMS classroom, 5th grade literacy classroom from the last unit that is where the students are the champions of their own learning. So take your time and peruse through there. It is a comparative piece, so you could play this for your classroom and students could self-assess, hey, where are we in relationship to owning our own work? Especially with writing, there's lots of peer editing and reviews, and they really need to be collaborative. So it's important that we're giving straight and clear feedback. So use this as needed. Special shout out, thank you, Miss Blackwell's class from Dilworth. Let's recap our key points from today's PLCs and name our next steps. Remember that the lessons and standards are all interconnected. Please plan accordingly. You're going to want to reference your work from this session when planning for each lesson. Think about how to keep vocabulary at the forefront of speaking and writing expectations. Be sure that you're planning for all block by gathering the data points we discussed and be thinking about the scaffolds each student needs. And always, we're continuing to gather data on all our students' strengths and weaknesses. The module unit repeats, so this information is invaluable to future planning. Thank you so much for letting me host you today. Please take a moment to fill out this literacy survey so that I can continue to better support you.